Howdy, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast. As always, we are brought to you by Mountain Tough Fitness, Blokes Modern Men's Health, and Trapline Beard Oil. Go check out the show notes and use the promo codes to score some sweet discounts. Now, today's guest is a man with many talents, from trapping to hunting, but what caught my attention is 3D printing. Yes, my guest today has built a bit of a cult following around creating 3D printed trap replicas for training and ornament. John Petrak, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I've been really excited to talk to you. I mean, before we get into the first line of questioning, I mean, I feel like you've definitely blown up, at least on Facebook, or at least in the sphere that I'm in, as of recently. And the reason being is you've been producing these really amazing 3D printed traps that children, educators, collectors can leverage to either train or play with. And, it's just the coolest freaking thing. And it seems like the most simple idea, but man, how cool is that? So before we get into it, I just want to say thank you for what you're doing. It's really cool. And I can't wait to get my package in the mail this week.
Yeah, it's been a good thing. I really have enjoyed the ride thus far.
Yeah, well, we're going to get into a lot of that. So we're going to kind of revert back to the first question I ask every guest, which is, what is your first core memory of ever being exposed to trapping?
It was about 1977. I acquired a 1.5 single spring uh, trap, and my friend was a trapper. He was trapping mostly muskrats and raccoons, and he was selling them and stuff. And I took that one trap, and he gave me a little chunk of wax, and he told me boil it, melt the wax and pull it out real slow so it coats the trap, and then go and set it. Well, we knew we had fox on our property, and I went and set the trap, and I remember checking it daily, and I didn't catch nothing. And one day I got done hunting, I went over to check my trap, and there was a fox in it.
Too cool.
And that was my first trapped animal, was a red fox. It was a young male that didn't have good color at all, but I did get $75 for that in the round.
Yeah, I mean, so that was in the late 70s. So that was kind of in the peak fur boom. So were you in Wisconsin at the time, or where were you at when this happened? How old were you?
I was in Michigan. I was about 17.
Man, it was that like I talked to a lot of guys from that era of kind of that fur boom. Like, two questions. One, after failing so many times, what was the first feeling you had when you walked up to that red fox? And the second question is, when you got $75 for it on the round, like, what did that do to your psyche? Were you hooked on trapping forever after that point?
Um, when I first walked up on it, I was elated, and then I immediately went to, now what am I going to do? I had a shotgun with buckshot and slugs, and that created quite the predicament for a while. I was concerned about what I was going to do and how it was going to end up.
But you sounds like you figured it out, though. It sounds like you were able to not leverage your shotgun and take care of business, so to speak, and be able to save the hide.
Yep. I finally, yep, I was able to get it and secure it and put it in the freezer, and then I went with my friend to the next his next trip down. I don't know what is about 40 miles away, and we went and sold it. And yeah, for some reason though, I didn't stick with trapping after that.
Really?
I
So you had
Yeah.
one critter, and then you kind of took a break after that.
Well, I did take a few raccoons after that. He had coon dogs too, and we'd go coon hunting. And every opportunity, I was a big squirrel hunter. I was a big hunter, but not a big trapper. And you'd have thought that would have lit the fire underneath me, but it didn't at the time. Um, I just hunted hard and took what animals were available to me. I probably should have, in hindsight, I should have invested that money into traps and kept after it. But then the bust was a couple years after that, so I
So
wouldn't
then
have.
did you end up coming back full circle? So you entered at the peak. It didn't quite sink its teeth into you in the way you might have thought it would have. And then the bus came and probably came. So at what point in your life did you kind of come back around to trapping, or at least getting back into an interest in like everything else trapping related?
Well, I I I had a couple beagles, and I was trying to feed them as many rabbit tracks as I could.
Hmm.
Well, I started noticing that every place that we went, there was canine tracks.
Hmm.
They were either fox or coyotes. And then we had a few close encounters with coyotes with the dogs, and especially in the spring, because the coyotes would get territorial about their denning spots. So um, my thought was that maybe I'd take up trapping and try and eliminate every coyote in the area.
That's awesome. And so when you started seeing these coyote tracks, like what was the process of like reintroducing yourself? Did you go dig out that same single leaf uh, trap that you caught the fox in, or were you at a point where you were like, well, I'm going to go and kind of start anew and get some four coil spring footholds or snares? Like, what were you doing at that time?
Well, I did a lot of research online. The internet was available at the time. I don't think YouTube was around, but there were some message boards, and I was on Michigan Sportsman. A lot of guys were on there, and there was a trapping page, and those guys posted lots of pictures, and that really piqued my interest. And these guys knew what they were doing, and if they could do it, maybe I could get some pointers for them too and some ideas. So I, grabbed a dozen Duke two coils, number twos, and the bottom of the line, because I didn't know how long I was going to stay in this, and just give it a shot and see how it turned out for me.
And then what was that? Was it a similar process to your first fox where you start to put out a trap and then it's like no success, no success? Because I mean, there is a step up, right, between canines, between fox and coyote, talking about like whether it be their wit or their, ability to evade, at least in my case, and same with wolves. So, like, what was that, re-entry with your kind of lower end Duke traps? Like, did you have pretty immediate success, or did it take?
No, I think it took like 2 years before I got my first coyote, and yeah, it was a lot of frustration. But you know, I learned through deer hunting that very few things come easily, and especially the most rewarding ones won't come easily. If I went out and set a trap, I caught a coyote the next day, it would have nowhere near the reward as the 2 year wait that I had to catch one.
I think that's a very important thing that a lot of people overlook with trapping and hunting. To your point, is it is in most instances very much delayed gratification. Like it took me 3 years before I caught my first wolf, and I always am wondering like where that grit and resilience in people comes from, because at least in my generation I feel like we're missing that a lot. People want instant gratification, they want instant everything, and so was that just part of your nature to where that didn't bother you for those first 2 or so years before you caught a coyote, or was it just fuel because they were beating you?
Exactly, fuel. I know, through hunting and through life in general, if you apply yourself, you you keep working towards it, eventually you'll be successful. There's a lot of ways you can go. I see guys, some guys on the internet, they get a couple traps and they go out and set them, and bang, they catch something. And I think, wow, how lucky are they? But are they really that lucky? I I often remember that if I don't catch that animal right away, that animal's going to teach me a lot more about himself and his species than in the time that it does take me to catch him. Then if I caught him the first day, I'd learn basically nothing.
Yeah. And, you said you were a heavy hunter before you kind of picked trapping back up. When you did connect on the coyote after 2 years of trying, and then, we can talk a little bit about how that's been since that point. But, a question I like to ask folks is, have you found that trapping makes you a better hunter? And like, did you notice that, or was it kind of the other way around for you, where you'd been hunting for so long that that kind of parlayed well into making you a better trapper? But does that kind of nitpicky detail to be able to figure out how to get that canine to step their foot on a 6 inch by 6 inch square metal plate make you a better hunter?
Um, yes, the coyote, or I mean the trapping, definitely makes you a better hunter. It makes you more aware, even as a hunters, try to pick up every detail, every track, every rub, every scrape. The the They can't compare with the trapper. A trapper narrows your focus even more into into what that animal's doing, where it's coming from, where it's going. People tend to narrow their focus too much sometimes, I think, where like I'll go on Google Earth and zoom out and see the areas, because when I had the beagles, I noticed that they hunted the areas very similar to the way that we hunted. They would go through this little patch of thicket, and then they would go over to this patch of thicket, and it all just fits together. It keys in.
That's awesome. And then you say you're back into trapping, you get your first coyote. Have you stuck with trapping since then, or has it also kind of gone through ebbs and flows? Have you do you consider yourself a trapper to this day now?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm more of a trapper than I am a hunter. My hunting's, you know, we have a long bow season here in Michigan. It goes a month and a half, and then goes into gun season. Once gun and that starts a week before Thanksgiving. Once Thanksgiving comes, I'm ready to set some traps. I sitting out in the cold in my older age is not as fun as it used to be, and I like getting out there, getting moving around, you know, and and not being stationary. Hunting in Michigan, a lot of places is a sedentary sport where you're isolated to this stand, and I'm traveling around setting traps and stuff and doing a lot of walking, and I don't have a very big line. I just do enough to keep me busy.
Well, that's awesome too, and for your health as well. I mean, I started my hunting experience back east, tree stand hunting, and it takes a different. Not to say that it's different types of challenging, right? Like sitting in a tree for 8 hours a day is its own like form of physical and mental torture. But to your point, I'd rather be out walking around all day, whether that's on a line or spot and stalk hunting, and not so much because I dislike tree stand hunting. I loved it when I did it. However, I think I have too much ADD. Like I got to be moving. It's a different type of torture for me to sit in a tree for that long and be quiet and not move and pee in a bottle and all that good stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Sitting there staring at the same trees day after day gets old. it can get old, especially, we can hunt all the way up to last week was the last week of doe season. So from it, like the last week of September, there's deer season's open all the way till now, and that's just crazy.
That's a long time. But I mean, it's good to get stuff in the freezer though. But now let's take a trip back in our time machine though. So if you think about your career as a trapper from today back to when you caught that first red fox, can you remember, or does anything particularly stick out to you as the biggest mistake you ever made on one of your trap lines?
Biggest mistake on my trap line. Um, well, I do remember one time I was out on this marsh and a swampy area. A friend of mine let me trap. Had some very nice muskrats in it, and when I first went out there, it had the perfect bubble trails for the muskrats, and I marked them all. And man, I was getting some of the biggest rats that I've ever caught out there. Well, we had a little bit of a warm up, and I went back out there, and I fell through the ice, and I got a cattail right up the nose,
Ooh,
and there was blood everywhere, instantly shot everywhere. Um, that was probably one of them. I wasn't prepared for that. I didn't know that would happen. I talked to other muskrat trappers, and they said, "Oh yeah, that's happened to them."
wow.
But
I would never in a million years had thought about the potential violence of getting a cattail up your nose. I think when you maybe look at them, they look bendy and not too aggressive. But I guess if you're falling straight on it and get one right up the nostril, you're lucky. I
oh
guess it
yeah,
didn't poke your brain, huh?
oh there was blood all over my face, all over my coat, all over the ice. And luckily, as a man of the outdoors, I usually carry a few napkins in my pocket just for emergencies, and that was an emergency. So I stuffed it up there, and I got the blood slowed down, and I got back to the house, and when I walked in, the boss lady asked me what happened, and I said, somebody tried to steal my traps.
That's pretty good. Did you say you should have seen the other guy?
Yeah, I should have seen the other guy,
Oh man.
but yeah,
How
I got
how
cleaned
long did
up.
it take for you to register that it was a cattail? Because I imagine when you popped through the ice, it probably felt like you got punched in the nose. Did you immediately register what it was?
No, the first sensation was something warm all over my hand, and then I saw it, and it was like, oh my goodness! I didn't know if I was going to get it stopped. First thing I thought was I was going to bleed out right there.
Oh wow.
But I had tried to think of what I was going to do the next time I went out there, and I was going to put on the dog's cone, the cone of shame, so that way the cattails could just deflect off and they wouldn't go up my nose again.
That's actually a pretty smart idea. Um, so also kind of back in the time machine vein, thinking about past experiences, like what's the biggest mistake that you can remember ever making in your fur shed?
In my fur shed, well, we she helped me skin a few coyotes, and I had a particularly good day, and or I had a good night and a good morning. I shot my two bucks the night before with a bow, and then the next morning I caught three coyotes. So there's the pole barn was full at the moment, uh, full of animals that need skinned, and she went out there with me to help skin them. And I didn't have a power skinner or anything at the time, and we were just doing it by hand, and we were both. Uh, well, we'd watched a video about some of those guys. They're pretty rough with their coyotes and just yanking away on them. So we tried it, and we ended up ripping one pretty good. But um, after we got it tanned, we sewed it back together. It was okay.
Yeah. So the speed that can kill sometimes, it's when you got a full shed or a full pole barn, it's hard to not want to. Shortcuts isn't the right answer because you can do exactly what you said, but sometimes if you finesse it wrong, you can get a split pelt pretty quick.
Yeah, yeah, especially on your thinner animals like fox, um, muskrats. Yeah, it we were looking at a lot of work. We were going to see how it was going to work out. Well, it didn't work out for us so well.
Yeah. Um, so what have you done professionally then, John? Because what I want to do is segue a little bit from obviously your hunting, your trapping background, but I'm curious how you got into 3D printing. And I'm going out on a limb and saying there's some either personal interest or professional interest that overlap that led you to owning a 3D printer or, coming to a place where you're actually able to kind of produce these traps.
Yeah, the last job I had before I retired, they had a 3D printer there, and um, I was always asking about it, and I thought there might be an application for stuff that we do because I did lots of jigs and fixtures and stuff, and you know it takes quite a bit of time to machine the parts up to make a jig or a fixture. And I was wondering, if we could fit that in the application or in our inspection department specifically. And what we did, or what I finally came up with, is we started using the 3D printer to make jigs to hold the parts while the CMM came down and checked the parts, touch the probe off and check the holes and all the important features on there. Then you know I did. I would make the design and I would send it off to another guy. He was in charge of the 3D printer. You know, it, I watched it a lot. Was curious about it a lot uh, because I've been in the CNC world since like 1988, and um, actually, I had one job where we built our own CNCs. So I understand how they work and, not the specifics of each of the 3D printers, but, I know the basics behind it. So it interested me and started turning something in my brain. And I got thinking about, um, I've always wanted a bear trap.
Hmm.
And, and I went to Canada to bear hunt, and we were having lunch, and I saw one on a wall, and I thought, man, that would be kind of cool to have one of those. Well, every place I've looked, at conventions, at yard sales, and stuff like that, you're talking thousands, hundreds, or thousands of dollars, and then you got the 40-pound ornament that you're going to try and hang on the wall, and hopefully there's a stud there that's in the right location where you want to hang it. And I got that kept turning in the back of my mind for about 3 years, and I always thought that I'd give that a try. Um, a lot of 3D printers are high maintenance,
Hmm.
and then I heard about these newer ones that came out, had really good reviews, and I was sitting. It was last summer. I was sitting on the lawnmower mowing the lawn, and was thinking about uh, my past employment, and I was daydreaming, and I said, well, I guess all my designing is all behind me nowadays.
Huh.
You know.
Famous last words in your brain, huh?
Yeah, yeah, famous last words there it was because and so it started the wheels turning to where, yeah, maybe I'll get a printer. Maybe I'll get a printer. And I thought more and more, researched more and more. and I finally bit the bullet. And,
Now, have they
and
become a little more reasonable? Because, I have a handful of, I'll call them what they are, dorky friends who have been in 3D printing for, maybe a decade. And I remember when they were first getting them, they were extremely expensive. The material's expensive, and the cost to produce much of anything, like whether it was a small jig or a small replica toy, it's expensive to produce. So has the cost come down quite significantly then for what you're looking at? Or they're still on the steep side?
I actually don't know, the history behind them. I know some of them are quite expensive. I think the ones I have are about $600 or something
Mhm.
like that. So that I don't go spend $600 every day. Maybe if I was gonna start out trapping heavy, but
Yep.
I wouldn't spend that on a whim. There was some thought process, and maybe I could turn it into helping it pay for itself, much like my trapping adventures.
Yeah.
If
And
it,
then when you
if
did finally pull the trigger on getting a 3D printer, then how long was it before? Was the bear trap that you did for yourself, your own ornamental one, the first experiment you had with that, or did you try with other types of traps before you kind of graduated to the big bear trap?
No, it was the bear trap right off the bat. That was the main goal, and I was focused in. I spent probably and I bet I spent a good 100 hours or better designing it, refining it, getting it where I wanted it, making things end up the way I wanted.
Now I'm curious. I'm always wanting to know, you know, any first time is interesting, especially in retrospect. So, like, I've seen a lot of your bear traps that you're creating for folks, especially with like custom pans, and they look sharp. Was your first run pretty good, or was it like, do you look back at that first one that you did and think like, oh man, like I've come a long way, or is it actually like with all that refinement you did up front, it turned out pretty good?
It turned out pretty good, yeah. Yeah, I still have it sitting right over there. I have a hung. That was the whole goal is to get a bear trap, hang it on the wall. I still haven't got it on the wall yet.
Oh, too
I've
cool. And
been
then how did things just balloon from there? Because I mean, you started doing that. Was it then like people would come over, see it, and they're like, "Hey, John, like print me one," and it's like, "Okay, we'll do that," and then slowly just evolve from there. Or what's the story behind just the expansion?
Yeah. Well, let's see. I got the printer in July, and then I made one, and then I showed a couple people, and they wanted one, and everybody's saying, you could sell these. You could sell these. I go, well, that would be not a bad idea. If I don't really want to make a lot of money, I don't need money. Um, but it'd be a good little hobby thing to do on the side, and sell a few, let the printer pay for itself, and I can experiment with other things.
And
And
what was the next one in the lineup then? Was it a conibear? Was it a foothold? A long
it was
spring?
it was this little one we called the frog trap,
Ah,
because that was about as big as I could put on the printer. And I have to do it in pieces to get it to and put it all together. And I so one day while it was printing away, there was the Michigan Trapper and Predator Callers Association convention. I was doing a bunch of the big ones to hopefully sell a few and pay for my printer costs, and so I was doing a bunch of the big ones, and um, each pallet takes about 4 hours. So I had some downtime in between there, and I thought, oh, that's as big as I could make one. I wonder how small I can make one. So I whipped that up, and and I thought, hey, that's kind of neat. And then I thought, well, I bet you the kids would like those. So I made probably 50 of those and 20 of the big bear traps. And then I went to the convention, and that was like towards the end of August. And the the kids loved the little traps, and everybody was surprised about the big ones too. You know, the black matte ones, they really look like a dyed trap. So the, there was a kid that came up to the booth. I don't know if he was 7, 8, 9, and he was he was looking at it, and I said, "You can set it." And he kind of looked at me like he didn't really know how. So I showed him, I showed him how to set it, and then set it off with his finger. Or and or I mean, I set it and then set it off with my finger, and I said, "Here, you give it a try." So it took him 3 or 4 tries. He finally got the dog, switched in the right direction and got the pan lifted up. And he looked at me and smiled. And I thought, this is a good thing right here. And that's when the light bulb started clicking. The gears started turning about what this could really turn into.
Yeah,
And
as a parent, and before you and I got connected, and I was just seeing, your page, and the kind of the blow, especially leading into Christmas, and seeing a lot of the pictures people were posting of their kids setting and, like, trapping their stuffed animals. I take my kids on the trap line, and my daughter can sit there and watch me set a conibear, watch me set a foothold, but there is no substitute for hands-on exposure. And kids can't get that until they're probably like even early teens, depending on their size, just from the sheer strength it takes to set a trap. But the ability to destigmatize and take away the fear, and say, like, oh, I can set this thing like that, it immediately shot out to me like, this is, like you said, a great tool for kids.
yep. And then, so after that convention, I got home, and I got an email about a double long spring that somebody had made, and and there was a file on the internet that you could download and make one. Um, Being me, I thought I could do it better, so so I tried. um, I never printed theirs, so I can't compare them. Other people have told me they don't really care for it that much, but I'm not trying to plug myself or anything, but I just scaled it up. I had a big one, I had a small one. I wanted to go to about a 1.5 to number 2 size, and I scaled it up, reinforced, made tweaks here and there to where I liked it, and then ran with that. And then I took that one. Well, I took all 3 of them actually out to the local trap supplier out here, and as soon as he saw him, his gears started turning because he does training classes,
Hmm.
and he's does them with the DNR, and one of their trainers. He's retired now, but he still contracts and does trappers training. Um, so from then on, he was like my sounding board, and we'd confer back and forth, and that's uh, where we came up with the color coding. So it's all the dogs all across all the traps are all yellow.
Hmm.
So the instructor doesn't have to look at the sheet. He knows it by heart. The pans are blue and the fixed jaw is red, and that's the direction we took. After that, it was kind of a dare. Can you do a coil spring? Yeah,
Hmm.
I could probably do a coil spring, but it wasn't long into the coil spring that we found out that plastic doesn't make a very good spring.
Yeah.
Um, so I did try it, and I did make a few torsion springs out of plastic, but they didn't last very long, and failure rate was way too high.
Could you
So
leverage like an actual spring in there, like a really light, just regular metal spring in
that's
conjunction with
what
that?
that's what I'm using now.
Okay. Okay.
I hand wind them.
Oh, lucky you. See, everything's made with love from John Petrak.
Yes, yes. Well, and the Secretary of War also.
Yeah. I'm sure she's doing a lot. Um, with that ramp up too. So like Christmas time comes around. How were you able to kind of keep up with production? Because I have, I guess, two questions there. One, where are you seeing the most need? And this is a shout out for every fish and game department that listens to this show and every trappers association. If you don't have some of these on hand, get some because they are a great tool for education and they're easy to take through the airport. They're plastic. They're not going to set off the alarms. You can do whatever you need to with them. So, a quick plug on your behalf there because I think it's an awesome idea. But, what have you seen now is like the number one reason for people purchasing? Are you getting a lot of like departments of, you know, uh, for education, things like that? Or is it mostly just, folks like myself who are wanting to leverage it to teach my kids, or is it a mixed bag?
Um, Thus far, it's just mostly the parents. I've had quite a few uh, training and trapping training instructors um, buy them, purchase them out of their own pocket to have them there. Um, that was one of the big deals with the guy that retired from the uh, Michigan State that does the trapper training. He said the biggest problem, that frustrated him is he'd hand them a trap and it'd have a zip tie or carabiner on it, and they couldn't set it because the liability issues of somebody getting hurt or you know. It, so thus far, I think they're all on board. The Michigan uh, DNR has traps in their hands, and they said they're going to purchase. He just says that they just don't move very fast.
Well,
So
government action for you. Maybe the whole, what is it, the Department of Government Efficiency we got going on now will help speed things up across the board. Who knows?
yeah, but Wisconsin's getting on board with Michigan's methods for trapping, so maybe they'll be interested. I've had there's Alabama. There's a couple in Alabama that travel all over. They teach trappers trainings. They bought a bunch. Um, you know, right now it's mostly people that not unlike me that want to further the sport and get some recruitment.
Yeah, I mean, we'll share that too with even like Dan Gates and CRWM and these other folks who are really on the forefront of putting trapping out there. And I'll the box you're sending me, I'm going to make sure that I send the majority of those out to folks in my network so they get to get some hands on and play with it and hopefully continue to spread the good word as well.
Yeah, there was one out in Montana too. There were a group that are associated with training first aid for dogs.
Yep.
And that was the real pretty pan trap, and they bought a bunch of them, and they said for what they're gonna do, it's perfect for them.
Yeah. I mean, all those like dog training. I've had a lot of houndsmen on this podcast too, and there's historically been some conflict between trappers and houndsmen just, for bycatches and, the education that goes into it again, where you can do it without any harm and, The applications are truly endless in what you can do, but this is actually a great segue into my next question for you. Talking about associations, talking about conventions, which is, what do you see as the future of trapping?
It, trapping is tough right now with the fur market down. I hope that that's the only reason for the low numbers that I've seen at the conventions that I've been at recently. I hope that it survives this downturn and fur prices, you know, become more attractive. Uh, you know, I love the sport a lot, and I want to I I want to give back to it any way I can. And you know, I think this is a good avenue to get people exposed to it at a young age and maybe pique their interest and get them motivated to get out there in the woods.
I think you're gonna nail that. And I know even talking with my kids, because like I said, they know daddy's going trapping. They'll go out on daddy's trap line. But I told them, what's coming in the mail. I'm like, they're like, we can trap our own stuffies and all this stuff. So they're super excited. So I'll let you know. And I'm sure you like getting videos of how, kids interact with it, but something they can do inside. You don't have to go necessarily out in the woods and in the cold all the time, but, get to play around and practice setting. But the next question I have for you, that the last two are questions I ask everyone, but you've had a lifetime in the woods, whether it be hunting, trapping, exploring. What's the wildest experience you've ever had out in the woods?
Um, One of the wildest I've ever had was a friend of mine. We went up, oh, about 150 miles north, and we went bobcat trapping. And when we got up there, the snow was deep. We were about one snowstorm and a good breeze away from not being able to get out, get traps out and everything, or having to snowshoe in to get them and everything. But it was an adventure we planned all year, and we wanted to see if we could get a bobcat trap or get a bobcat in a trap. And we were up there, um, and we worked hard, and the temperature dropped to like minus 20, and nothing was moving, and we weren't successful. We weren't back here. The season was only 10 days long. We were back here for a week, and we'd got a nice warm up and everything. And he called me, and he'd caught a bobcat in southern Michigan. It's not at that time. It wasn't real common. It wasn't all that uncommon, but it's not something you see every day. And I said, "Well, you want help?" And he said, "Yeah, I could use some help." Well, when I got there, he had it on a long chain. He thought it, well, he was trapping for coyotes, of course, and it had gotten into a small tree, and we had to release it, and we, that turned out to be a pretty good challenge.
Did you
We
guys
didn't.
walk did you guys walk away with blood like you did from the canyon? Because I've heard some harrowing bobcat release stories.
No, luckily, it worked out fine. I kept wishing my arms were longer. He had the pole on the cat, and I was trying to get the trap, and it was a pretty stout number 3 double long spring.
Mm.
And but yeah, every time I got close to it, man, it'd flail those claws, or the teeth were right there. And yeah, it was up about, I don't know, for about 4 foot up in the tree, tangled around branches and everything. And but we finally ended up getting it. And cats pass out pretty fast, and that's what happened. It passed out. We got it out of the trap, got away, and he came to and trotted right off. It was we all lived happily ever after.
Yeah, on last week or maybe 2 week ago episode, I always end with a hypothetical, which you'll get yours coming up here in a second. But I asked somebody if they would rather fight 5 bobcat-sized mountain lions or 1 mountain lion-sized bobcat? And, of course, they said, I'll take the 5 bobcat-sized mountain lions because, 1 mountain lion-sized bobcat would just do you in. So, it's they're pretty amazing critters, to say the least.
Yeah, we both the the better half and we got our bobcat this year. I wasn't able to go to the UP. I wanted to go up for Fisher. We got to Mount Martin last year. Wanted to go up for Fisher this year, but they got snowed out. They were 3, 4 feet of snow, and the conditions were just the trails were getting shut down. There was too much water. The ground wasn't froze. There was too much water, and I'm just not experienced in those conditions. If I would have had somebody else with me, I might have went, but going it alone, I was I didn't know what I was going to get into, and I was concerned about getting in over my head.
Well, that's smart, and the Fishers will come. It'll happen. So, last real question, which is a hypothetical for you, and this is the best I could come up with. So, if you could only have access to one piece of equipment, what would it be? And here's the 2 options and the gotchas that go along with it. You could either have your 3D printer and you can trap any species you want, but only 1 month out of the year. Or would you rather have whatever professional grade, top of the line CNC machine that you'd want, but you can only trap one species for the rest of your life year round?
I don't know. Boy, that's a tough one.
They're
Um,
never easy. They're never easy.
no, no. Um, I'd take the 3D printer. I don't really need a CNC machine. I'd rather just be outside the majority of the time anyway.
Perfect. Well, John, we're coming up on an hour. Time flies when you're having fun, but I want to say first and foremost, thank you, A, for everything you're doing, B, for the traps I'm about to get. I'm very excited for those. And then, obviously, lastly, just for taking the time to chat with me, chat trapping, chat 3D printing. So, I know everybody listening to this is going to be extremely curious about how and where they can go and find and purchase these traps. Can you let people know like the best avenue for finding out, the pricing list, what you've got, and how to get a hold of you to get some?
Yeah, you can go to my Facebook page at Free Pop 3D, or if you search for plastic educational traps, that'll come up to River Rat's Trapping Supply. He's the distributor that I'm working with. He can take PayPal, Venmo, credit cards, and all that stuff. Yeah, it was just a little bit too much for me to do, especially just before Christmas. I wanted to get everybody traps that I could, but trying to fill boxes and build parts and wine springs and deburr parts, and yeah, that was a little bit much for me. It was a big rush.
Yeah, well, I mean, well-deserved rush too, though. So, for everybody listening to, I will link to both John's Facebook page as well as the River Rat Trap Supply, so you can go if you want to leverage your PayPal or your credit card or whatever it is to grab some. But John, again, I really appreciate it. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your season. And everybody listening, we'll catch you on another episode of the Okayest Trapper podcast.
Thank you, Zach.